Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for being here at Catholic Charities, Our Daily Bread Employment Center, for this important moment in Baltimore history. What you will hear today is an introduction of the work of how our city government and public safety institutions are turning the tide in how we respond to all victims in Baltimore. Before we begin, I want to recognize and thank those standing with me today, the people who have been leading these efforts in our city. Our Police Commissioner, Michael Harrison, Director of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, Ms. Jackson, the Chief of Victim and Witness Services for the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office, Marie Stevenson, and Lee Martin, Program Director for Catholic Charities, Our Daily Bread Employment Center, my City Councilwoman, Councilwoman Danielle McCrae. I want to thank Heather Warrenkin, Executive Director for the Center for Criminal Justice Reform at the University of Baltimore, for conducting this crucial assessment that will change the way that we serve Baltimoreans experiencing victimization for the better. And lastly, I want to recognize all of our partners, our hospitals and medical institutions, community organization partners, advocates, and city staff for working together to make this possible. We know that every shooting or violent incident leaves behind a web of trauma for the victim, as well as bystanders, families, neighbors, and even the perpetrators of that violence. To this end, for the first time ever, I have made significant investments in victim services as a top priority and crucial component of our comprehensive public safety strategy. A public safety strategy that is centered in the understanding that a public health approach to public safety is the only way we can move Baltimore forward and break the cycle of violence that continues to plague our communities. Under my direction, the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety Engagement, or MONSE, has led a coordinated trauma-informed approach to the work in ways that acknowledge the varied and unique needs of victims of violence across their lifespan and lived experiences. It is our shared responsibility to ensure that not a single victim gets left behind. In partnership with BPD and their victim service units, and in a shift from past practice, MONSE will ensure that victim services include offender accountability and lift the sole responsibility of individual safety from the shoulders of survivors of violence. And again, for the first time ever, Baltimore has expanded these services to support gunshot victims because we know that this is something that will make a real difference in the well-being of our residents and our communities. This administration's investment in and focus on victim services is connected to the necessary work of reimagining policing, the development of a community violence intervention ecosystem, the build-out of a victim services portfolio within MONSE, and the continued reformation process required by our consent decree for our police department. We are developing coordinated, interconnected strategies to make Baltimore a safer place for all. And in a moment, you'll hear from Commissioner Harrison and Director Jackson on the collaborative efforts to address the findings of the National Public Safety Partnership's Victim Services Capacity Assessment Report that focused on underserved survivors, including boys and men of color, and those impacted by gun violence, and the work being done to move Baltimore ahead in our work to better service victims. We still have much more work to do, but I believe that we are now on the right path to ensuring that all Baltimoreans have the services and resources they need to not just survive, but thrive in our city. And with that, I will turn it over to my councilwoman, my favorite council person in Baltimore City, Councilwoman Danielle McCrae. Madam Councilwoman.
It's a great pleasure to be in community this afternoon with a dedicated cohort of individuals who continue to service community members that are experiencing victimization. I do want to begin by thanking my mayor, Mayor Brandon Scott, for proving his commitment to bolstering wide-reaching and comprehensive Victim Services through his funding commitments to Monty and community-based organizations who are diligently working to tackle this issue. Also want to thank Director Jackson and Commissioner Harrison for their leadership in taking this victim-centered approach amidst this greater push to heal our city. As we continue to work together to strengthen our public safety blueprint and mitigate the pervasive nature of community violence, we must ensure that victim services and outreach are top priorities. Last year, I introduced a resolution to recurrently address the prevalence of violence against women in Baltimore City, along with strategies and future solutions that our agencies have and will input to reverse this public health epidemic. Baltimoreans experiencing victimization are not simply statistics. They must never be forgotten and deserve all necessary means to heal, to feel safe, and regain control of their lives. I do thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I'm excited to see how these efforts will manifest and service all communities across our city. Now, at this time, we're going to hear from our Police Commissioner Harrison.
Thank you, Councilwoman, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I would like to thank the Public Safety Partnership and the Department of Justice on their work in delivering this report. As part of our ongoing efforts to reform our department and rebuild public trust with our communities, our department requested this report in implementing our crime reduction and departmental transformation plan, which includes an increased focus on victims. The Public Safety Partnership provided an extremely thorough and robust report engaging BPD, city and community stakeholders, in best practices to build up and invest in victim services in a way that we have never seen before. The reporting concludes with 21 primary recommendations that require a multidisciplinary and multi-stakeholder response. And upon receiving the report, we began the work of partnering with the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement on a plan of action and identifying the steps to implement those recommendations. Our BPD leaders also began to review the recommendations with the internal stakeholders from BPD's Victim Services Unit, Consent Decree Implementation Unit, the Equity Office, and across our operations divisions. Upon review, we found that many of these recommendations intersected with our own reform priorities to include Consent Decree implementation, BPD's community policing plan, and the city's group violence reduction strategy. Since then, we have continued our partnership with the Public Safety Partnership on the implementation of their report recommendations. For example, our ongoing collaboration and partnership with the PSP have led to subject matter experts coming to Baltimore to work with our Victim Services Unit and our homicide detectives to set the groundwork for new protocols around death notifications. PSP's recommendations also align with our ongoing consent decree implementation, and we have already updated and developed new policies and training regarding procedural justice, crisis intervention, use of force, community policing, interactions with youth, and behavioral health. Additionally, the implementation of the department's community policing plan and the city's group violence reduction strategy speak to our ongoing commitment to developing policy, training, and performance management systems for a cohesive and trauma-informed approach to gun violence across the department. And by adding 9 new professional staff positions to support GVRS and community policing activities, we're adding more departmental capacity to focus on underserved survivors in a trauma-informed approach. Last, the large share of PSP recommendations involves the expansion of BPD's Victim Services Unit to include additional victim service coordinators and expanding partnerships with community-based organizations. So not only are we committed to expanding upon the services provided by Victim Services team, we're working to expand the team and their work in other areas of operations to develop strategies for increasing collaboration among community stakeholders in order to provide trauma-informed services to victims of crime. And in response to the report, we've already expanded our Victim Service Unit focus from not only covering all homicides, but also piloting coverage of non-fatal shootings in the Western and Southern districts in hopes of building out the unit's capacity to support shooting victims in all 9 districts, and to ensure this work is expanded on a solid foundation. And we've updated our operational procedures, refined our parameters surrounding the program's partnerships to include more non-governmental agencies, promote interagency cooperation, and most importantly, to provide better coordination of services to those directly impacted by violent crime. And we are committed to doing just that. So thank you, and at this time, I'll turn it over to Director Shante Jackson, the Director of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement.
Good afternoon, folks. Good afternoon, folks. All right now. Thank you, Mayor, for your vital investment in the expansion of victim services for Baltimoreans. Thank you, Commissioner Harrison, and other agency partners for your collaboration in this work. We know that the co-production of public safety requires a both-and approach. This partnership is indicative of what we can accomplish for Baltimore when we work together. Thank you to Catholic Charities and all of our community-based partners who are here with us today for your support and your expertise. You all are the true voices of the folks that we serve, and we couldn't forge ahead without you. Last but certainly not least, I want to recognize and extend a huge thanks to Heather Warrenkin, who at the time was a member of the PSP team, for leading this assessment and delivering this report. It's already been, and will continue to be, instrumental in informing the way that we serve people who experience victimization in our city. While our partner agency requested the report, MONSE's learned so much from its recommendations and continues to use its findings to shape our approach to victim services and the way that we partner with others in this space. For example, beginning with the PSP's first recommendation of prioritizing trust and relationship building with the community, over the last year, MONSE, in partnership with BPD, has laid a strong foundation for and worked in partnership with 2 community-based partners in the Western and the Southern Districts, Fayette Street Outreach, located in the Fayette Street Outreach Penrose neighborhood, and Greater Baybrook Alliance, located in the Brooklyn Curtis Bay neighborhood. Thanks to our FSO partners for being here with us today. All of this has been a part of a neighborhood policing plan pilot program. MONSE is also beginning to plan for truth and reconciliation sessions and listening tours that will involve BPD and city residents. Another example of partnership based on PSP's recommendations is building trust and developing collaborations with our area hospitals. In February 2022, Mayor Scott and MONSE convened chief medical officers from area hospitals to talk about the vision of our hospital-based responder programs as a part of the CVI landscape. I'm proud to say that MONSE is currently in the process of finalizing official partnerships with these area hospitals, who have triaged over 1,100 gunshot victims in 2021, to make sure that we're ensuring a coordinated hospital-based violence intervention and victim services network. We've also secured funding to provide training to all Baltimore-based area hospitals that regularly treat gunshot victims. This training is going to be provided by our partners at the HAVI to ensure a common set of standards and a spirit of collaboration across all of our partners. Now, as you all heard Mayor Scott speak to, and as many of us have witnessed in our own lifetimes, the residual trauma of gun violence, intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking have compounded year after year, incident after incident. That means that for generations following victimization of any kind, Baltimoreans have lived their lives without adequate resources, and as a result have had difficulty with unpacking and addressing the trauma associated with their experiences. That's unacceptable. And as a city government, we have to do better. We are doing better. In January of this year, MONSE established a dedicated victim services lane, a first for city government. Working in close coordination with BPD and the state's attorney's units around victim services, our victim services lane works to intentionally fill the gaps that exist in serving victims and survivors who haven't been traditionally served at the local level before. That means crisis response, advocacy, therapy, wraparound services, community awareness. They're all crucial components for us to address the trauma and ultimately prevent re-victimization. And for the first time, Mayor Scott has prioritized investing in services of gun violence victims and other crimes. This didn't exist when my son was shot in 2018, walking home from the bus stop after work. MONSE serves as a central point of contact for victims and survivors to make referrals to resources and facilitate access to wraparound services that promote the well-being of someone's physical, mental, and emotional health. But I want to take a step back and talk about how we're working to redefine the word victim. This has led us to employ a broadened definition of victim, recognizing that we've got to address the deep traumatization of residents who've been broadly impacted by violence. This definition accounts for the village as a whole, from the direct victim of violence to witnesses, to friends, and to family members of that person. It also accounts for victims of gun violence. Historically, in our city, Baltimoreans who have experienced gun violence have not been considered victims. That means that access to services and trauma-centered care have been as accessible to them as they have been for others, and as a result has exacerbated their trauma, often driving retaliation and re-victimization. It's important for us all to acknowledge that victims of gun violence are indeed victims, and we're prioritizing their needs. To do this, MONSE hired Baltimore's first ever gun violence victim services coordinator to redefine domestic and family safety and promote a more culturally and geographically appropriate approach to treating victims of gun violence. You all hear me mention time and time again that cultivating public safety in Baltimore can only be accomplished through a coordination and partnership process that includes local, state, federal agencies, our community-based organizations, our businesses, and our institutional partners. Collectively, we have to focus on providing the optimal services and resources to victims of violence while identifying the gaps and the barriers that victims face when they're trying to access these services. This includes enhancing crime scene response to reflect trauma-informed practices while preventing re-victimization, developing a communication strategy to promote victim services that are available at the city level, reviewing current policies and procedures, limiting witness intimidation for victims involved in an investigation, and strengthening cooperation around witness relocation. MONSE's proud to lead this effort and is grateful to the mayor's investment of over $8 million in ARPA funds to support victim services. Our victim services lane is playing an active role in developing these wraparound services as a model associated with our CVI ecosystem that includes key partners like those who are in the room with us today. In closing, I want to reiterate the commitment that this administration has made to Baltimoreans. As a city government, as public servants, we are here to do things better than they've been done in the past. We know that we have a long road ahead of us because healing from generations of unaddressed trauma is not going to happen overnight. We are here to let you know, though, that the folks that are standing here alongside Mayor Scott are working on your behalf to create a safer, healthier Baltimore in which we can all thrive, and that in the coming weeks, MONSE and BPD will be rolling out our plan and our timeline for expanded victim services here in Baltimore. We are here for you and will continue to do this work with you and community. I'll turn it over to Lee Martin, the Program Director of Catholic Charities.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Daily Bread Employment Center. And thank you, Mayor Scott, Commissioner Harrison, Director Jackson, for joining us here at our Daily Bread Employment Center for the announcement of these critical services to the citizens of Baltimore. Now, Our Daily Bread Employment Center is one of 84 programs of Associated Catholic Charities of Baltimore. And here at Our Daily Bread Employment Center, we do more than just address food insecurity through our meal service program. We provide assistance with employment, applications, job training, and job placement, assistance with applying for government benefits, financial literacy, computer literacy and addressing the digital divide, expungement services, dental services, information and resources, as well as services for returning citizens in partnership with the Office of Parole and Probation. Now, Catholic Charities believes in helping to heal the whole human in the journey of recovery from mental, physical, or emotional traumas. We understand at Associated Catholic Charities that victim services must serve both direct victims and those who may have been by perpetrators and are turning their lives around. And as a result of that, there are various Catholic Charities programs that help in these areas that include, but are not limited to, Our Daily Bread Employment Center, My Sister's Place Women's Center, My Brother's Keeper, the Fallsway Clinic, and the Esperanza Center. We also provide trauma-informed behavioral health counseling, addiction services, including medication-assisted treatment, peer recovery coaches on the streets to connect people to various services. We also operate 2 safe streets, safe site focusing on preventing future traumas. And inside of this building, we have what's known as the Christopher Place Employment Academy for those males that are returning citizens. Now, one of our peer recovery coaches, Mr. Dexter, who has joined us today, recently came to me so passionately about how he was able to assist both a victim and their family with wraparound services that were so crucial in their recovery process. Now, Catholic Charities also plays an active role in trying to prevent violence with our Safe Street programs, where members stand as violence interrupters and mediators. Our 2 Safe Street programs, in conjunction with My Brother's Keeper, recently held a community safety walk in the Irvington community to extend the awareness of Catholic Charities services that are available throughout the city. Now, as Director Jackson said, as well as Associated Catholic Charities and its various programs and Our Daily Bread Employment Center, we stand committed to the ongoing work in partnership with the mayor, the Baltimore City Police Department, and MONSE for the benefit of Baltimore. Now I'll turn it back over to Mayor Scott for questions.
Thank you, sir, and thank you to Catholic Charities for always being a part of working to make Baltimore the best version of itself. Questions? Justin, you can go first. You're sitting right there. Hold up.
This is for the commissioner. I actually don't know too much about the BPD's Victim Services Unit. Can you talk a little bit more about what they do and how that's going to be enhanced going forward?
Well, they are always working to stay in contact with victims, keep them updated with status of cases, provide and connect them with services that might be needed by surviving victims. Now going forward, coordinated and led by MONSE, we'll be able to expand that to hopefully in the near future all 9 districts, even non-fatal shooting victims will have wraparound services and access much like the surviving victims of homicides.
Is that it? All right. Up. They're recording it. Sorry about that.
You mentioned, or I think someone mentioned that this had become, Some of the recommendations are made from a report done by Ms. Warrenkin. Can you talk more about the findings in that report?
Yep, I'll let the director and the commissioner address that.
Thank you for your question. Many of the findings of the report, there are a total of 21 total findings that can be found on page 51 of the report, span from police and community relationships, which is in fact the first recommendation, around making sure that those relationships are solid so that when folks are victims of crime, that there is a level of comfort with regard to engaging with our law enforcement partners, who for all intents and purposes are community members as well. And so I mentioned earlier making sure that we are fully engaging in truth and reconciliation conversations so that when victimizations happen, there is no fear associated with those particular interactions. A couple of other key items revolve around policy change, revolve around compensation work that BPD currently does for victims of crime, revolve around making sure that there is a coordinated victim services ecosystem, if you will, between Monty and the police department to make sure that we're filling in spaces that one can't fill in alone. You want to add anything here?
I think the only thing I would add, you said it very well, how we define victim and how we give services to other members of a victim who was a victim of a homicide, the surviving family members and close persons to that, and how we incorporate all that into what a victim is and how we give services.
Anybody else?
Good afternoon, Lydia Watts, Executive Director of the Rebuild, Overcome, and Rise, or ROAR Center. Nice to see you, Mayor and
Always.
Commissioner. As you well know, we at ROAR represent both our lawyers. I also have my senior therapist here today. We represent crime victims from the city. About 50% of the folks who come to us are gun violence survivors, both non-fatal shootings and family members. Of course, I know you know Miss Darlene, who is a survivor herself, and she works closely with ROAR as well. My question, I have a number of questions. One, is the report being made public? It still has, I saw a copy of it a week ago, but I do not have a version in hand, and I'm just wondering if that's going to be made public.
Yes.
And is that through?
It's already on the police department's website.
Excellent. And I couldn't help but notice that it was dated July of last year. Is there a reason why it has taken so long for it to be publicly disseminated?
Yep. Director Jackson will walk you through all of that. Thank you.
Okay, but if I may, actually, if I just hold that question, thank you.
Well, you only get
Shante.
two, so that's.
I'm getting more than two.
That's 2.5.
So the more substantive question is about the police practice of when folks are shot and brought into the hospital, that their property is taken, everything that's on them, and what is being done to rectify what, me as a lawyer, feel like is a violation in some instances of Fourth Amendment. And it certainly creates a lot, I mean, many of the survivors who come to us, that's their primary concern, is getting their property back.
Yep. Thank you, Director.
You're taking me away from the... I have one last question about compensation. Well, I mean, these are all topics that I think the media would be interested in hearing.
Lydia, it's always good to see you. Thank you
You
for
too.
your questions. I'll take the first two questions and then turn the last question associated with the confiscation of folks' items while at the hospital to the police commissioner and his team. With regard to the publication of the document, I want to offer my sincere apologies because I know that when we met a few weeks ago, I committed to releasing a copy of that to you all in advance of this session, and quite frankly, time got away from me. So I'm going to ask for some grace there because that was on me.
We'll always get my grace, absolutely.
That was on me, but it is publicly accessible on BPD's website along with the executive summary that Monty and BPD jointly created. With regard to the timing of the report, so the report was in fact delivered by the Department of Justice back in late summer of last year. BPD requested this assessment, as the police commissioner mentioned before. We got it back in July, and at that time, BPD started doing an internal review around what they were already addressing and what needed to be addressed. There was some time that they needed to spend having a conversation about the findings of this report with the Department of Justice, given that we are in a federal consent decree, and over the past year have been working very closely in partnership with MONSE around a shared work plan that bridges the work between the two agencies, but also work that the state's attorney's office does in connection with victim services and other local, state, and federal partners. And so the timing of the release was to make sure that we were having a conversation with Baltimore about not just what the findings were, but what we're doing. And I'll leave the last question to you.
And the last question, that has come to us as well, about property from victims being taken. The only thing that should be taken, and this is guidance that we are still receiving from our law department, is items that are considered evidence in a crime that's committed. So nothing should be taken that's not evidence of a crime, of that particular crime that was committed, but we're working on guidance to restructure policy and training so that we can have the appropriate protocols to remedy that.
And one quick follow-up is how would, many of our survivors are unable to retrieve property that has already been seized, and is there a proper, I mean, we've talked endlessly to the property division, and we're not able to get any of that property back.
We are still in the process through legal guidance and practical protocols on how to return things to the appropriate persons who own those items and what items are evidence and should be maintained for evidence. But it's a reformation that's actually happening to make sure we can remedy that and only take what's evidence and only take what is necessary for a criminal case.
Thank you. I appreciate your answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.